Hello and welcome back to Harry's Jeti Clinic. In this episode we're going to look at creating a smoothly proportional unmixer, a demixer. I can't think of a nice phrase for it. I'd certainly recommend watching this video even if you don't think it applies to you, because it will show you some of the sneaky things you can do in the programming here to get the results that you want. And it might come up with an idea that you hadn't thought of that you can apply to a situation that you're trying to program, even if you're not looking at this particular application. What do I mean? Take, for example, coupled aileron to rudder as a mix. You hold the aileron over, it's put in a certain amount of rudder, but you feel you need a bit more or a bit less rudder, and as you move the rudder stick, particularly if you're holding on a lot of aileron, you are not going to get the rudder authority that you wanted, and you can hit limits. What do I mean? Well, for example, I've got a very basic model set up here. Channel 2 is the aileron, channel 4 is the rudder. A basic 50% mixer is switched on. There we go. I'm holding full left aileron. So of course we've got left aileron and left rudder. If I now feel I need some rudder input, I'm going to move the rudder stick to the maximum. Of course, it tries to add or subtract, whatever way around you like to look at it, 100% to the 50% left rudder, and therefore would give 150% left rudder, but it hits the servo travel limit at 125. If I was to push right rudder on, I would get minus 50 plus 100, so it'll go to 50%. Now, what would be nice would be some way of, when we move the rudder, we regain normal rudder at minus 100 to plus 100. This came about in a conversation I had yesterday with John McNamara of jetstream.co.uk, from whom I bought this Jeti transmitter. John is to thank, or to blame if you think my videos are a nuisance, for getting me Jeti in the first place. And John is a keen glider flyer, and we were reminiscing about the Multiplex 4000 and some of the functionality that it had, because it was way ahead of its time, and how John misses a function called analog switch in the Multiplex 4000, which he could use to smoothly switch off the mix by moving the rudder stick. And he hadn't found the equivalent yet in Jeti. And he'd been inspired by one of my videos about the logic switches, seeing the bit where you can switch if X is outside or inside values, to move the rudder stick to switch off the mixing. And that can be done, and at small values of stick travel it works. At large values of certainly the aileron stick, you get some nasty effects. Let's look at what can be done then. So what we're trying to do, as a reminder, is when I move the rudder stick, get back to a nice smooth minus 100 to plus 100 travel. And if you're wondering who's going to be holding over and trying to move the controls the other way, it can apply particularly to gliders that have very large wingspans and not very effective fins or rudders. Particularly think things like the Nimbus series of gliders, some of the Schleichers, whatever, with very high aspect ratios, large spans, but not very effective fins and rudders. And I believe this applies in the full size as well. The Nimbus seems to be fairly well known for having poor rudder authority. Enough of that schmoozle. Let's have a little look. What we could do, and what I think John originally tried, was a logic switch. So we'll assign it to logic switch 1. Say OK to that. Out of there. And let's go and make our little logic switch. It's nice and quick, this. Logic switch 1 will be, now control 1 will be the rudder. We need it proportional. OK to that. And we want X is inside. We'll go for 5%. There we go. Notice now, we don't need another control in this logic switch. We don't need a condition. It will just work. So P3, the rudder stick, if it's inside 5% either side of neutral, so from minus 5 to plus 5%, it's on. If I move the stick outside those limits, left or right, it'll go off. So I'll move the stick a little bit left, it goes off. I move the stick a little bit right, it goes off. Lovely. We've got a switch for the mixer. Say OK to that. Come back to our mixer. Edit that. As you can see, it's now using the logic switch. So if I move the rudder, the mixer switches off. We can see the actual output value here. We've set a master value to 50%, but the actual output value of the mixer will be 0 as it switches off. 50 as it's on. As it switches off, it goes back to 0. What effect does that have on the servo? There's the aileron, there's the rudder. At small travels, it looks quite good. Yeah, you can see it's watch the rudder one particularly. That doesn't look too bad. See, it's a bit of a jump there as I start moving the stick to the right, and it suddenly switches off the left mix and jumps into there and a little bit there. But if I use a large travel, and this is to exaggerate it, but it shows you what's really going on. Watch what happens as I now move additional left rudder. You'd think that minus 50 would become more, like minus 52, 53, 54, 55, 56, and on. Well, it starts to, and then watch what happens. Oh my goodness. I'm moving the rudder left, and look, it disappeared. What happens if I move the rudder to the right? Bang, way over there. And that's because, as I start moving the rudder left, when I get to 5%, the mix switches off. So 51, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, boom, off. And all we're left with is whatever rudder stick I've got. And of course, if I move the rudder to the right, it'll go down 5% and then suddenly switch off and go over there. So, see, at small travels, you barely notice the effect. See that? But once you get into larger travels, you get a very nasty kick. Can we smooth that out? Oh, yes, we can. Beautifully. And this is where the sneaky part comes in. What I'm going to do is, I'll go back into Premix to explain this actually. If you have a straightforward two-position switch like this, in effect, it's either on or it's off. And as you may know from some other videos, we can assign a rotary control to this, one of the sliders, so that instead of simply being on or off, you get a smooth change in proportional value, where a two-position switch is in effect saying 100% is on, off is 0%. And the mixer takes the master value here, multiplies it by the value here to get an output value. So 50% times 100%, or 100% of 50, is 50. If we do that, 0% of 50% is nothing, because anything times 0 is 0. So if we can assign a smooth proportional control here, we can smoothly alter this. So instead of jumping from 50 to 0, it would come down from 50 gradually down to 0. And we get our nice smooth mixing. So you think, haha, simple, Harry. Simply assign the rudder P3, is it? Yes, P3 control. Well, that will not work because the rudder is going from minus 100% at full left, 0% in the middle, and plus 100% fully right. So that's not going to give us the nice multiplications we need. What we need is a curve that is plus 100%, i.e. switched on, when the P3 stick is in the middle, and which falls down to 0% when the P3 stick is full left, or when the P3 stick is full right. Now you're starting to think, use the curve in here. No, won't work. That's the mix value to here, and if you set up things in there, it does funny stuff. In fact, that's actually the curve of the aileron to the rudder, not the curve of the switch. So, since we can't use the rudder stick, what do? Well, we do use the rudder stick. This is where you've got to stop thinking about that being a rudder stick. This is not some 1980s or 90s Futaba JR. This is a P3 stick. It's just, in the language of these control systems, an inceptor. It generates an electronic output. What you do with that is up to you. By default, we have created a function called rudder. That function contains all sorts of parameters and devices like joule rate switches, function curves, and we then pass the signal from the stick through the function and then onto the servo. Well, we can create another function, and that's what we're going to do. We'll say function assignment plus, I'm going to call it car mix because it's coupled aileron to rudder. So coupled aileron to rudder mix. Say OK. And we're going to assign it to the same inceptor, P3. Proportional? Yep. Okie doke. Say OK to that. Now that we have a function, we can go to its function curve. We'll leave the rudder with the standard -100, 0, +100 curve. But the car mix is going to get the sort of curve that I've just described. Change it to a 3-pointer. Wrong button, come down. So this point here, I need to be 0. This point here, I need to be +100. And that point there, I need to be 0. There we go. Now, there's the gun sight showing where the rudder stick is left to right, and the up-down value shows the actual output. So here, with this rudder stick at neutral, it's outputting 100%. And with the rudder stick at full travel, it's going to output 0%, in other words, switched off. So the output would be switched on, output switched off, and smoothly graduating in between them. Say OK to that and come back to our free mix. Edit that. Come down here, and now we'll simply assign that to, not to logic switch 1, but to the car mix. Now you can't just wiggle the rudder stick here, because it will simply look at the stick, not a function. Yeah? If I wiggle this, it won't say rudder, it'll say P3. So how do we get that? We come in here, again, come down to functions. Oh look, there's car mix. Car mix is at 100%. If I move the stick, see that? 0 at full right, 100% in the middle, 0 at full left. Lovely. That's the beast we want. And it appears to not be working because it's defaulted to this type of curve. Let's press, which is not proportional. Proportional is switched off there. It's blacked out. Let's switch proportional on. Still not working. Is it working the way we want? Actually, it is, yeah. It's just fooled a little bit by it saying 9. Oh, there we've got 100, 99% there. That's stick at middle. 99%, we'll call it 100. It's probably just a tiny bit of calibration needed. It's just nudging 100 there. If I push full right, it goes to 0%. And if I push full left, it goes to 0%. Say OK to that. Now, the acid test. I have not rehearsed this. I have not done a dummy one before making this video to check if this works. I worked it out in my mind, and I am so confident that this will work that I just went ahead and made this video. Now, I suppose the fact you're watching it and that I published it means that this worked, because there'd be no point in publishing something that didn't work. So here's the big test. I'm about to move the rudder stick. Will the actual output value smoothly fall to 0? Let's go left stick. Whoa! Yes, 0 at full left. Back to the middle. Now I'll push to the right. Full right, 0 there. And the big test, let's look at the actual rudder. Remember, number 4 is the rudder. I'll push full left aileron. It's giving 50% mix. Now I'll start pushing left rudder. Will it jump back to near zero as it did when we used the logic switch? Will it go out to minus 125 as it did when we weren't using any switching? Moving the rudder stick now. Smooth movement out to minus 100. Lovely. Back to the middle. Now I'll move the rudder stick to the right. Smooth movement all the way. And we get full 100%, which with a mixer switched on, we could only get plus 50. So there you go. You can have complete control of the control being mixed to. And that's it. So you might find another nice application for that. Enjoy that one.